I wish we were in person, and excited to see that we've got folks across the country and some folks from across the pond and globally. So welcome. Really want to make this a learning and high impact session for each of you. And Susie has suggested I start with a joke, which surprised me, but I'm going to honor her request and do it. So bear with me. It is, why don't accountants ever throw parties? Anyone know? Anyone put any thoughts in the chat? No? Okay. It's because they're afraid there will be too much overhead. Okay, I know everyone's on mute, but I hope there were a couple giggles to get us started. So just a little bit of context on me and Growth Access and what I do. I run a full service coaching and development firm in the Bay Area. We work nationally and globally with a number of different companies and industries. One of the quotes that really inspires the work is, if you want to go fast, you go alone. And if you want to go far, you go together. And I think especially as we think about CFOs and the finance executives, it's how do you go from a function that can often be siloed and individual and at times be separate from the business to be very much integrated, to be about the we. And it's folks, I think when folks start a finance career, it can be much more individual contributor, having siloed functions that you lead. And as you grow into a bigger responsibility, it's about the we. It's about partnering with the business. It's about building teams. And this is one of the most important mindsets of the leaders I work with, of how do you go from a me mindset to more of a we mindset. And then the work that I do is looking at how do you support leadership and organizations at the intersection of business results and culture. And you can't have one without the other. A lot of times people like to say, oh, there's the touchy-feely leadership stuff. And it's really important to do both, especially as you grow in an organization. This is me. Susie already did a great job connecting me, but some of, just to say that I've been in the shoes in past roles, and I think what makes, it really informs my coaching as having, especially for CFOs, is having been in roles in consulting and banking and even in a past life in FP&A. And that's sort of what's different, I'd say, about coaching with Growth Access, is we think about not just doing process coaching or skill building, but it's understanding first the business needs and the functional needs, and then moving into the leadership from there.
Julie, sorry for the interruption. I think you're sharing screen, but it's not showing up. Do you want to try again to share screen?
Oh, it's not. Oh, shoot. Okay, I have no idea why, but let me try. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, that's strange. Let me just get this.
And I would just observe that I counted at least, I think 20 different states represented. And I think we have someone who joined us from Italy. Thank you so much for joining late in the evening. So quite a diverse group.
Fantastic. Okay, let's see if that works. Is that working now?
Yes, it's coming now. Thanks.
Okay, sorry about that. Thanks for letting me know. Yeah, and welcome everybody. This is just a little bit on Growth Access, what we do. It's a mix of one-on-one coaching for executives, and thinking about things like, how do you scale yourself? How do you really build aligned and collaborative teams and get the best performance from each member of the team? Taking teams to the next level of impact. I think one of the things, especially if you are a CFO or looking to become a CFO, or even moving into CEO, is having the right team so you can scale yourself. One of the biggest things I see with my CFOs is they can get stuck in the doing, and you've got to level the team so you can be showing up in a much more strategic place. And then we also do custom designed leadership programs. And this is I'm getting one of those things where it won't go forward. Give me one sec. Oh, okay. Okay, there we go. So from today, what we want to get into is, I'll share the do's and don'ts that separate world-class CFOs from the rest, and also give you a bit of an overview on executive coaching and how it might be supportive to you on your own developmental path to be playing at the top of your game. And as we go through this, one thing I'm going to offer you to do as we warm up is just in the chat, if you could share one piece of feedback or advice then has been most helpful in your career? And this could be something small, it could be something big. But what's one piece of advice that maybe surprised you? It could have been feedback from a boss, from a mentor, from a friend, a colleague. What is one piece of feedback? And the reason I ask this, oh, keep your day job. That's funny, find a hobby. Yeah, I like that. Pick your battles, get visibility. Um, and the reason I'm asking this is we get to a certain place in our career by doing our job and doing things the way we think we're supposed to. And to get to the next level, we've got to get input from different places. Everybody, I believe, has zones of genius and brilliance, but nobody is good for the most part at everything. And so, how do you get support? And I love some of these. Don't try to do everything yourself. Sharing objectives, priorities, communications. Feedback is a gift, not something that is going to ruin your career. It's actually going to help your career. And staying aligned with your CEO. Thank you for sharing that. Those are really fantastic. So I'm going to take you through uh, what I have found to be some of the top leadership lessons from the world-class CFOs that I've coached. And these are not the end-all be-all of every single thing you'll ever see under the sun, but from the standpoint of leadership and development. And when I do 360s on CFOs and find out what are the things that really help them and what are the things that get in their way.
I think you went on mute. Yeah.
Okay, that was weird. So the 5 lessons are, and I'll go through in each slide more detailed profile of each one of these. Developing trusted partnerships with the business. Really being someone that is not just a back office function or an order taker, but a proactive leader that collaborates with the business and understands the business. Second, proactively building high performance and emotionally intelligent teams. Realizing that you can only scale as much as your team can scale, and having an attention to building that high performance and giving feedback and not being shy to give feedback. Third, embracing innovation. Don't avoid risk, manage risk. And something Susie and I were reflecting on before you all joined is that I think you said, Susie, that volatility has never been higher, like even since COVID started, than this week. Is that right, Susie?
Yes, the volatility index is at highest it's been since early 2020.
Yeah, and so we're working at a time with lots of intensity where our default can be to avoid risk at all costs. And the trick of the CFO is to manage the risk. Fourth, practice strategic leadership and storytelling. A lot of times we get so busy and it can all be about getting the reports, getting the numbers, getting specifically the ask done that was told to me by my CEO or somebody else. And a key thing is always to take the space to level up from the 10 feet, the 100 feet, the 1,000 feet to the 100,000 feet, and make sure you're asking the right questions. And then fifth is cultivating executive presence and gravitas. Being a leader that thinks not just about the what you're doing, but the how you do it and how you inspire confidence with others. So I'm going to take you through each one of these. As we go through this, I'm going to ask you, as a coach, I really, as I talked to Susie and Charlotte about, I don't like doing one-way presentations. I like them to be interactive. It's a little trickier with a big group. And I want each of you to take at least one thing away from today that you're going to take a step on to support your own leadership or for your team. And so as we go through these 5 leadership lessons, I want you to jot down 1 or 2 practices that you want to step away from. And after this session today, think about how you put into practice. Okay, so can I get a quick, maybe a little thumbs up on the screen? Is our folks game to do that in terms of writing something down and paying attention? Because sometimes when you just listen to things, it gets boring, but actively engage in this. And there'll also be an opportunity for Q&A. If you have questions as we go through this, Susie is there's a chat that's open and you can ask questions, and Susie will make the call of whether to have me answer the questions during or at the Q&A period. Okay, great. So first lesson number 1, develop trusted partnerships with the business. I love this quote from the head of finance at Gusto, which is, from keeping the score to moving the business forward. And one of the biggest risks, and you have this sort of visual here of the world of finance, is we can sit in our little bubble. It can be a big bubble, it can be a little bubble, but we make it a bubble. And that's one of the biggest mistakes the finance leader can make, is they can see themselves as part of the G&A function, a cost area, and separate and not strategic to the business. They can do things like applying accounting principles to how they lead and taking sort of a double decimal point, T crossing, I dotting, to doing everything in a perfectionistic way, which is not the same way we apply to leadership. Leadership is much more about the 80-20 rule and applying both the intellectual and emotional intelligence to things. Don't serve as the process police. A lot, it's hard because finance, the buck stops with finance in terms of presenting numbers, managing many processes. But if you consider your identity as the process police, it's going to limit your impact and your ability to be a true supporter of the business. Don't wait to be included. And this is, one of the key leaders that I have worked with, a CAO that was passed over for promotion because she was someone that was following process and letting process lead her role. She didn't have the relationships to get ahead with the business. And so sometimes, as you know, there might be processes that are dated that can require updating. And the business, you may have the best process in the world, but they're not very good if the business doesn't buy into them. And so one of the things we did with her when she in our coaching was having her start joining, be like a finance business partner and joining some of the business meetings, whether she's there regularly or at least to present a couple times to help the business understand the why they do the things that they do. But waiting to be included and then serving as the process police in the back end can be a real recipe to burn out for a finance leader. Another thing is the finance folks can forget sometimes they may have the most business know-how in how to run a company other than the CEO. A lot of times, our leaders on the product side, in engineering, in sales, in R&D, et cetera, may have very little training of running a business. And so something as finance executives to not forget is you may have a lot more integrative operational know-how that you can bring to the table that the company would really value. And so on the do's here, it's be a strategic thought partner and enabler to the business. One of the most talented CFOs I have worked with, who is now a president and on her way to becoming a CEO, is someone that started with me as a VP of finance. And the way she worked, she was running FP&A at the time, and she became an enabler to the business. She had, she was invited to the business meetings. She was asking the business not just the questions about the numbers, but how to run the business and what are the business questions they need to solve for. And she became almost more of a consultant to the business of helping them tackle operational tasks. And another area is just grokking the business. Even some of, I have a world-class CFO actually that is super respected. But one of his inhibitors as he wants to become a CEO is he doesn't know the technology of the business well enough. And so it's really critical to take the time to understand the business, understand the product nuance, especially when you work in a more technical field where it might not be as fun or there can be higher barriers to entry. It's really important to understand the business variables, to understand things and solve business problems versus spreadsheet problems. Another place where especially this emotional intelligence comes in is being curious of the needs of your diverse stakeholders. So really knowing your stakeholders and who you're supporting, not just what are you trying to get from them to run your process as a CFO, but what are they needing? What keeps them up at night? What are their biggest questions? And building trusted relationships that often can start out, both formally and informally, where you know them as humans first. You've taken the time to learn them as humans. And then you also can support and add value to the conversation, but it needs to start with listening first versus telling, which some of us that come from technical professions in finance, you feel like you always need to have the right answer. And actually starting with that, listening to other people and where they're coming from, and then collaboratively coming up with answers is a much better approach. And this is where sometimes with coaching, a 360 can be extremely valuable. And that's something, I don't know if has anyone ever done a 360 in the group, and I'd raise your hand or say yes. Yeah, is that something that people have seen? So doing a 360 where you can do them both online or with a live interview process, but I find it to be a really insightful way to understand what are the perceptions of your key stakeholders about your leadership. Where do you really shine? And where might you have blind spots? Where could you're asking questions like, where could we take your effectiveness to be 20% or 50% higher? What would make the difference? And so that can be a great step for a leader that's in their career that's wanting to grow, just to get those external perceptions and have a reset on that and know what they're needing versus what you think they need. Also, proactively stepping into the conversation sooner because you add value. And so that can be where you're getting invited to these key business meetings where you're not waiting so long to be part and be at the table. So let me pause there. Any, and Susie, I don't know if there's any questions or anything you want to offer before I go to the next lesson on this one.
Don't see any questions or comments in the chat at this point.
Great. Okay, so let's go to the second lesson. So proactively building high performance, high emotional intelligence teams. If there is a single mistake I see people make across the board that is incredibly detrimental to being an effective leader, to growing your business, it's keeping the wrong people too long. Okay, I can't tell you. The best leaders I coached, the most successful CEOs, CFOs, et cetera, have done this. And it's something that is not only challenging for this leader, but it can really create havoc on a culture. One of my most successful CEOs had actually a really challenging CFO, and that he kept her too long. And it was one thing for him to have this energy suck in his leadership, where he was probably spending 20 or 30% of his energy. And that doesn't mean all the time he's working, but that kind of that energy field we run in the back door where we're perseverating, where we're stressed, where we go home at night and we can't sleep because this is happening. This can create stress in the individual. It also can really be caustic to the team. Because if you signal that you keep people, for example, that are technically strong, but not a good culture fit, that are not working well with others, that are not respectful around honoring the values of the team, that can create retention risks with some of your most important people. It can demonstrate to the people that you're not a balanced leader, that it's fair, and it can really take a lot out of folks. And so I love this quote from Steve Jobs, which is often we can hire fast because we really suddenly we get the go to hire and we got to go fast because we got to fill a hole that we're desperate to fill. And actually, it's the reverse. It's hire slowly and fire fast. And if there's one thing you walk away from today, I'd say this is probably the most important thing because we like to be nice as human beings. And if anyone's heard about radical candor, you may know it's based on two parameters. It's about care personally and challenge directly. And a lot of times we can get in the quadrant of ruinous empathy, where we care personally, we're a nice person, but we don't challenge directly. And that's hard for most of us, except for with some notable exceptions. Most people do not like to give tough feedback. And by living in this ruinous empathy place where you're not giving direct feedback, not only are you hurting yourself, the team, but the perspective people often forget is they're actually hurting the leader they're not giving the feedback to. Okay. That person is getting held back because number one, they might not be aware of what's not working. And number two, this might not be a good role for them in the long run. There might be a better environment, a better company, a better role for them to fit into. And sometimes it can be a different role within your own company or team. Sometimes it's leaving the company. But avoiding giving feedback is a huge mistake to make. And it's something that it requires energy for us to put into place, and it's worth the energy. The short-term costs that we avoid by not giving it are really not worth the long-term benefits or long-term losses. Another area on the don'ts is assuming recruiters and your human resources function on their own can handle your people needs. Another really best practice that I work with all my leaders on is if they have recruiting needs, that they should rely fully on recruiters. And actually, one of my strongest recommendations is you should be your best recruiter. You want to always be leveraging your network. You want to be active in the process. You want to be part of always doing reference checks of any person you hire. Do not outsource this. This is something that you want to be on top of and own. Same thing for HR on your people needs. If there's people that are challenging, a lot of companies can make the mistake of, oh, HR is going to give people the feedback. HR is going to handle this difficult person. HR should be a thought partner. They should help you run a process if you need to put someone on a performance improvement plan, for example. They should help you with processes like succession planning. At the same time, it should not be their role to fix people. That's part of the boss's role to handle this and have a strategy.
Julie, there's a question in the chat that said, should performance feedback and compensation be connected or should be dealt separately?
That's a good question. I think I think there's a process step to that, and then there's a holistic focus. I think ultimately it should be connected. I'd say that feedback, we want to always be giving feedback from both a performance and also a value standpoint. Some of my smaller companies can only do the performance and not the values fit. And I believe compensation and promotion should be tied to both of these. And so you want to have a process where you do performance management. And ultimately, when you're paying bonuses, doing raises, that should be linked. And there should be criteria around how you do that that's linked to performance on both of those quadrants. Does that make sense, or any further question on that question?
I need to come back later.
Yeah. Okay, great. Great. Okay. And sorry, I'm not looking at the chat because it's a lot to share my screen, but thanks for throwing that in, Susie. Another area that can really get in the way for folks is having teams run so thin that they burn out. And one of the best class CFOs, CEOs will hire ahead of the growth. They're planning ahead to look at the team they need for the future, not just the team right now. And that's something you always want to be thinking about. And I will tell you, I've never seen the level of burnout or mental health challenges in teams as I have before in the coaching I'm doing right now in the world. I'd say for the last year, it's been worse than ever. It's even worse than it was during COVID, because people have been running so long and because of this increased volatility in the world. And I think also because of the remote working engagements where people are not together with people and work has become much more transactional. But people are burning out, whether it's because of resources or not being connected and knowing the teams that they're working with well. So then on the do side, one of the biggest ones is having difficult conversations sooner. Making it, and one of the practices I often do with folks, especially that are averse to do this, is make having difficult conversations a regular process where you might set the expectation that you do this on, a minimum quarterly basis, but, even it can be monthly, where you ask your direct reports to ask for feedback. And so you could have a direct report managing the conversation where they have it as part of the process agenda. And then it gives you an opening to give feedback and step back, because we can all get stuck in our one-on-ones and the normal day-to-day of updates on the work stream, getting into the tactile, never getting into the more strategic conversation, whether it's around feedback or even about the business. And so having those step back conversations and having a process where there's an expectation to do that, because when it's an ad hoc thing, it can be much harder to prioritize. But if it's a process that you've set up with your team, that's part of your regular work, it's much more easy to do. The other part I'd say is with your boss. If you work for the CEO or someone else, also be someone that runs that process where you're asking for the feedback on a regular basis. And it can be just something really simple of anything I should stop, start, continue doing. And having that be an informal question. You might email your boss beforehand and let them know it's coming, but start to make it easy. I'd say the folks that get the most mentoring and coaching are ones that ask. And you can't get this without asking. And so set up processes that make it easier to have these difficult conversations and just honest conversations. They don't have to be difficult. Also recommend that you hire for and lead from not only functional prowess and technical skill, but from values. This is one of, I'm coaching a first-time CEO right now, and this is one of the biggest challenges he's dealing with, is he's got these really brilliant folks working on the team with loads of functional expertise, but they weren't a good fit for values. They're not integrating with the business. They're trying to be the smartest guy or smartest girl in the room. They are not thinking about cross-functional needs. They're thinking about their own needs to have more resources and budget. And so you really want to hire folks for values and assess on that as part of the interview process. Another area is I actually mentioned this already, is planning to scale your team ahead of growth. And so this proactively investing. And one of the mistakes, and CFOs, as Charlotte and Susie were sharing, this group can be a more introverted group, less wanting to be shiny and out there and networking. And I'd say it's really your job to be out there networking and be investing ahead so you have relationships. So when you have the need to hire, you already know the pools of people you're going to grab from. And being out there networking where you're at events, where you're staying connected to a network, where you're also asking others for help in the location of talent, so you can scale your team ahead and not be on your hind legs. It's another thing I see my CFOs really getting into trouble, because they can have a mindset that they want to be cost cutters. They don't want to be spending too much, and so they might be the last part of the organization that hires to fill important gaps. And so really plan for that scaling. And then this is an area where, if you want to work with a coach, something that is a real signature place that I work and my team works is around developing a map of your talent, where let's look at how do you situationally manage, motivate, challenge, grow your people, and building development plans for each person on your team and yourself. And so that you have a bit of a roadmap. And one of the ways that I work with leaders on this, especially, is I use a tool called the Enneagram. It's similar to a Myers-Briggs, but I find it to be about 10 times more impactful. It gets to what someone's greatest strength is and how they overdo that strength to have a blind spot. And when we do this with a leader in their coaching, and then also with their direct team of direct reports, we can quickly build a map of, wow, how do we get people in their zones of genius? And then how do we want to challenge them and support them to get to the next level? And this could be incredibly productive, efficient, focused work to build a plan and then start a way to give feedback to each person on your team. And it can be something that's in the room where you're building trust, even where, one of the worst things people do is they can pretend that they're good at things that they're not. And if you can build the trust with your team, where there's an open level feedback of, here's where I'm in my zone of genius, here's where you are, here's where I'm going to bring you in. And if anyone's ever heard of the 5 dysfunctions of a team, trust is the baseline. And one of the most important things about trust is people being able to say, I'm good at this, but I'm not good at this. And if you can start to build this sort of awareness with your team, where you're building a team that, I know I'm good at this, both from a functional, but also from a leadership level, and here's where I could use help, that's the way we do start development. Okay. So any questions on lesson 2?
I think it's a good one.
Okay, great. So let's go to the next one. Lesson 3.
Julie, there was one question about, should you spend more time on high performers or weak performers?
That's a great question leading into the answer, which is you always want to spend more time on your high performers. I think this is one of the biggest mistakes people make, is they focus all that energy on developing and coaching the people that are on their way out. And I think the first thing is to know who really, do the 2x2s and the assessments or 9-bucks. Who are the people that you believe are the long-term talent? Spend your most time investing in developing them. And then I think quickly decide where are the folks that are long-term fits and where are they not, and make calls on that faster. Okay. So let's keep going. Lesson 3. embracing innovation, don't avoid risk, manage risk. And, I've worked, one of the CFOs I work with from actually an investment management firm uh, especially in a setup like that, where any money that you spend, whether it's on the business to invest for the long run, is something that's going to take away from the profits of the partners. And so they can avoid things like, oh, investing in longer term technology that's going to up level the effectiveness, the efficiency, the accuracy, or even things like leadership development and coaching. Because again, that's going to take away from the bottom line. And so one of the important things is to look not just at the near-term costs, which we can get into a fearful mode, especially in these moments right now, where a lot of my leaders or investors are stepping back from commitments that they've made. There's been surprising changes because of all the dynamics in play, and be thinking about, where do you invest? Where is the most important places that you do invest for the long run? And I love this quote from the CFO of Envoy: "If the controller says no, a CFO says yes." And so, in the mindset, don't assume you need to default to being conservative all the time just because you are the fiduciary. One of, a best practice, one of my leaders that I've been coaching, she got this feedback as part of her 360 that she was too conservative. And so what we worked on is, leading the scenario planning and managing expectations, not just by giving her recommendation in single answer, but giving scenarios, whether it's, aggressive, moderate, conservatively risked, or some other way, where there's one or two or three options with pros and cons and a recommendation, but you're ultimately letting the CEO and the business make the call on this. And when you do this, what's great is you can validate assumptions, because sometimes as CFO, you might not know all the nuance of the assumptions you're making from the business side. You might not know fully how to price in these risks. So if you can make the assumptions and you can debate the assumptions and the risks with the business, you're going to show up better equipped and more like a thought partner than, again, a process police or a super conservative business leader. Another place to not do is holding on to dated processes and systems. And we can all get really comfortable with the status quo. And it's hard to change systems and processes. It's uncomfortable. And in this environment, especially, we all know, hopefully, I don't know if you've already had a session on AI with his group. I hope you do in the near future. If not, I hope you do many. But how are you embracing AI and other technological advancements? Where,
We did have a session on it, and that was also a very popular one, Julie. Totally agree with you.
Fantastic. Great. And this is where you really want to stay smart. You really want to stay current and think, where are their leapfrogs? Because there's opportunities to automate basic tasks. Your role, you want to be keeping to up-level your team to be as strategic as they can be and getting them out of the tactical. What else is important here? I think driving integrated strategic planning is another area that's super critical. This is something that the CFO has a special ability to lead this, and sometimes they don't take it. But this is where the CFO recommends doing strategic planning, not just from the spreadsheet bottoms up or the top down, where you see people, oh, we've got to cut the budget by 10% by function, and that becomes a chess game where everyone's just trying to keep resources and as much budget as possible. But instead, driving integrated cross-functional strategic planning. And something that I do with leaders and teams is we do strategic visioning exercises where we get the executive team, sometimes some other experts together, and we look at the bigger business picture on the strategic vision and plan, and then take it into the work streams instead of it being this bottoms-up plan to get to the 80-20 and also to support innovation. And there's a lot we can accomplish with just a 2-day offsite to get people thinking much differently and starting to say no. I'd say one of the biggest things that people do, and is a good place for CFO to plummet and play, is to say, not just where are we saying yes, but where do we say no to say yes to the most important things. One of the biggest mistakes my companies make, especially in an environment of strain, is we're saying yes to trying to tackle everything. And to be good at your role, you need to do a few things really well, not everything, at sort of a C or B plus level. Okay. Let's go on to lesson 4. And gosh, this time is flying. I thought I'd go faster through this. Practicing strategic leadership and storytelling. I really like this quote from Peter Drucker: "The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, It is to act with yesterday's logic. And as a CFO, one of the mistakes I see, even from some of my great CFOs, is they're only operating at the 1,000-foot or the 10,000-foot level. They're not going up to the 100,000-foot level and asking the why, asking what's the transformational solve to this versus the incremental solve. And I also can see folks applying unnecessary complexity, looking at spreadsheets and graphs ad nauseum, but just not getting to what are the questions that are most important to ask. And I have a very successful CFO that the CEO is complaining to me that while he's strong in many ways, he's not leveling up to that level of strategic thinking needed. It all comes for the CEO. And one of the best things you can do as a CFO that I think the CFO is uniquely suited to is to be the strategic thought partner to the CEO. There's a reason I coach a lot of CEOs. It's because the CEO job is very lonely. And it's not easy to become the strategic thought partner because the disposition of a CEO is they need to be confident, they need to be assertive, they need to act like they have all the answers even when they don't. And having a strategic thought partner in their CFO is incredibly supportive. And so building that relationship and coming in and being able to ask the why and then the what and how. A lot of times what I see with my leaders right now is people get so trapped in the what they're doing and the process to get it done versus are we doing the right things? And that's a key part that you can bring in the role. Let's see, one of the things with the coach can be helpful in this is taking strategic step backs. If there's a practice that I see is it's always a challenge, but it's never been a bigger gap, is people taking space to be strategic. When we go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, we're not able to bring in our biggest strategic thinking, even if we're very strategic. And so taking space to step back, that's why we have these shower moments where we bring practices like mindfulness and basic hygiene that we all know of, but we don't do in terms of whether it's meditation, whether it's exercise, whether it's how we manage our energy to get off devices by a certain time and not have our phone next to our bed. These are important parts to be showing up strategic. And then the fifth lesson is around executive presence. And this is something that, often, whether it's fair or not, is more something I hear from my women executives. And what matters about executive presence is about the ability to inspire confidence. One of my most successful CFOs that I've coached was someone that had, while she was strategically brilliant and a thoughtful, empathetic leader, she didn't have the confidence. It was intimidating her to get in the room with the C-suite. It was all male and show up. And she'd grown up in the company, so it was also a bit of a what got you here won't get you there mindset where she needed to shift how she was. And there were internal mindsets. A lot of folks, even that come across as confident externally, might not be confident on the inside. And so, a mistake that there's sort of the internal world that is really important to work on in terms of your mindset, in terms of your beliefs. I think a lot of folks can have limited beliefs about having themselves be big in the world. So people listen to them, so people can hear them. I'm sure we've seen this in the presidential elections, where it's the people invite people that they like. They vote for people that they like. They vote for people whose presence makes them confident and comfortable, whether or not what they say is all that valid. And so really important to spend time thinking about not just what you're saying, but how you say it. And a really simple best practice, and I'm sure you've heard, but people often don't do, is stepping back and spending, at least as much time of it, you get the perfect presentation and then you show up and you do it 5 minutes later without thinking how you're going to present, without thinking, do I do the pre-meetings to align and influence the team around this, without thinking about what are the difficult questions that are going to be asked of so I am present. And so this is something that, coach can be really supportive of to practice presenting, to work through limiting beliefs and to shift to something that's more empowering. Okay. So that is, and so what I'd love to have you say, I've gone through a number of practices and I'm curious from this, what's one practice or one area, whether for you or for a teammate that you might want to consider practicing from this conversation? What's one thing that you think could be supportive? Any thoughts, whether it's a category?
Julie, I mentioned to you before that I was thinking of getting a coach because I saw some of the things that you mentioned. I could benefit. And it was interesting seeing the chat. There are a lot of folks with significant experience as CFO or
Yeah.
VPs of finance, but we still see opportunities for growth. So that's one.
Yeah.
In the chat, there's one person who says challenge regularly. Another said CEO relationship. Another person said executive presence. Someone asked if the slide deck will be made available to attendees. Yes, we will. Charlotte's kind enough to share that with anyone who registers. Someone said, I like what you said about inner confidence. Someone else said, stop wasting too much time on underperformance. Another comment was schedule regular feedback sessions. Mindfulness meditation. A question was, how do coaches price their services? Maybe a question for you.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, in terms of pricing, it can vary. I'd say the way I work is I generally work on, it sort of depends on the structure of what we're doing. And I'll go through a little bit more about coaching and how it can help. But it's sort of in terms of when you're doing one-on-one coaching, often a coaching retainer. And for a program that's a minimum of 6 to 9 months, sometimes a year, where we're incorporating a 360. So there's a fixed fee for the 360 and then a monthly fee for the coaching. And then for teamwork, there's usually a fee for facilitation and planning for offsites. And so it just depends on the scope. But these are some of the ways that coaching can help and where I've seen impact from leaders, and I put some quotes in there just to give you a sense of the areas. I like to think of 3 areas of focus in coaching: leading self, teams, and organization. And from leading self, this is some of the inner mindset work. And I will say this is, I didn't go into that in a whole lot of depth today, but I will say it's some of the most important work I do with leaders, because it's sort of our inner mindsets where we have an opportunity to see ourselves differently, to see the world differently, to see we think there's a certain right way, because whether that's how our company is run or how our family works, where we don't step into our full power and agency, and we can get ourselves into a victim mode where we're not stepping up. And so this leading self is a really critical place as you're morphing in your leadership and growing. Next one is leading teams. And this is a space where thinking about how do you build trust? Trust is the currency. There's a book called Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey and his son, actually, and it's brilliant because there's examples of when you have high trust, whether it's with your team or with your business partners, you're able to get things done so much, not only more efficiently and effectively, but more joyfully, and it makes work a much more fulfilling place. So there's sort of that baseline. And then in addition, you're able to raise performance when you have this trust where you know people, and then where you're doing performance management. And so really working on intentional performance management. And then the last bucket is around leading organization and stepping up to be strategic and helping companies and leaders stay true to your mission and your strategy as you grow. Let's see, and then I think any other slides, a couple more slides. I need to spend a lot of time, but this is just an example of the teams I work with. Something that I often find with teams, they get stuck is they go from forming to storming, first conflict, and norming. And they can get stuck in what I call the washing machine cycle between storming and norming, where we enter conflict, but we don't ever fully align on these norms. And so we don't get to performing, which is where we really want to be. And this is something I work a lot with teams on. And there's an intentional strategy, not just to the work, but how you build teams and have things like shared goals and see conflict as a source for innovation and creativity versus an obstacle. And then the work that I do is really thinking about leader development in this part of a system or a team, and then as part of a system of a company. And I think one of the mistakes I see with there's a ton of coaches out there, and is that they think about random acts of coaching of one leader at a time. And to really do effective coaching, I believe, is to look at them as part of the team, the teams they're playing on and the system that they're in, to have something that's integrated and moving forward, not cosmetically or superficially, but systematically. So with that, let's see if there's any Q&A. And gosh, I didn't give this much time, but we've got some minutes and I think I can stay about 10 minutes after also if folks want to stay on for questions. But any questions folks have, I invite you to, if you've got a hop, feel free to link in with me. Feel free to reach out if you want to ask more questions. Feel free to look at my website. But any questions that folks have?
Julie, there was, as when you asked for what people will do, a lot of people came in with, and I won't read them one by one, but people picked up, there was a lot of comments about what people will take forward and try to act on. So that was really, really good. There was one question that I thought maybe it might be interesting to chew on a little bit. Someone asked about presence, executive presence. Is that perhaps a euphemism for stereotypes and biases? I think they said, is that a dog whistle for a bias? And can you talk about that and maybe could you try to shift paradigms or represent a different type of executive presence than what might be stereotypes?
It's a great question. And I think it is frustrating. I think there definitely are stereotypes of a certain way that's kind of the right way to lead. And it's challenging because the presence that's often people are comfortable with is the one that's already in place. It's the one that we're used to, whether we're working with investors who are a certain sort of subset of, in terms of what they are, whether they're all white or white males or whatever they are, it doesn't matter. But it's people are comfortable with what they're used to. And so to change that bias, I think ultimately someone with great content, and if they demonstrate both their strategic thinking and their values, ultimately that rises up in the end. It just can be harder because it's not fair. It is a bias. And what I say to folks is we've got to play the game for the system that we're part of. And so you can always shift the system you're in. And there are systems that are, are more respectful of diversity. And the reality is it takes time to make changes like that. And so part of the role is being, and I think this is what I work on with coaching is not faking it, like being true to yourself and finding a way that's authentic to you to have a presence that where you can show up confident. And so I think the key thing is not showing up with a certain kind of body language or look or feel or style. It's showing up confident and in a way that other people will listen.
Julie, there was numerous comments about great insights. Thank you so much, and great session. So let me just relay that. There was a question about being your own recruiter. If you are with a small, medium-sized company, how do you attract great talent?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say in terms of attracting great talent, I'd say first you as a leader, you want to be investing to have a network of folks. So staying in touch with people that you have worked with in the past, meeting people, whether it's at conferences or events, really being out there in the world. I'd also say leveraging your teams and your own community. And so it can be as simple as posting roles on LinkedIn. It can be asking your teammates. So I often suggest you ask your teammates, ask your boss, have them putting it out there also into the network. And so you're really leveraging that network, not just your own, but the collective network. You can ask friends if your friends have relevant networks. But continuing to think that you own this process. The other part of that I'd say is especially internal recruiters, they're so busy. They do great work and they're juggling so many things that it's hard to be someone's top priority. So you managing and being proactive with the recruiters in terms of the job description, the scoping, the timelines, being, volunteering to help and doing drafts of a job description as appropriate.
Thanks, Julie. Kind of question from me. When do you think is the best time to reach out to an executive coach or sort of what are good triggers? I used to think it was when you're early in your career, but I'm thinking now maybe it's transition points. So maybe you've been a CFO for years, but there's a new CEO, or you've been a CFO for years, but you change into a new company. But would you have any advice on where you think coaching can be most impactful for folks?
Sure. Yeah, I think it can be, it's a number of different parts. I think having change or just having a need to grow. But I'd say a first-time CFO coming into a new organization as you're onboarding, and so doing something where you get a 360 in the first 6 months to get that feedback early on, where people are giving the feedback and giving grace, but stepping in and really thinking about What's working? Where do I need to develop? Because there's a lot of best practices that are important as a first-time CFO. I'd say a company that's in growth mode or in massive change. So if you're navigating growth, change, you have a new team, that can be a great time. And that's where there's both the one-on-one coaching, which is very much oriented around your personal leadership and strategic remit. There's also work that can be done in terms of doing offsites with your team. And I do a 1 day or even a half-day teaming workshop that can be really powerful as you have a new group of folks coming together, or just an existing folks that you want to take to the next level of performance and trust. And so that can be a different way than the one-on-one coaching to invest.
And Julie, I'm going to ask one last question, and we're going to try to wrap up on time because I can see people have to drop off. So if someone wants to find an executive coach, what are questions they should ask to determine who is the right coach for them?
Okay. Yeah, those are great questions. I'd say it's really good to bring in kind of a specific example of where you're wanting support and actually doing a mini kind of case session with a coach, and just to see how the feel of the coaching is. I'd say a criteria that I always like to offer is you want someone that is both going to support you and be your champion, but is also going to challenge you. And it's got to be kind of that right balance between the two. So bringing them a case study of what you're wanting to get support with, and then seeing, how does this feel? Does it feel like a great fit to me? Because you want someone that you're going to trust, that you can really feel comfortable to be vulnerable, but also someone that's going to challenge you and it's going to help you think differently. If they're only going to kind of, I call, codepend you and tell you you're doing a great job and move on your questions, it might not be a big enough or more strategic enough coach for you.